there's a reason why Warlock has always had a deck type in constructed, and they've always been very varying deck types, right? There's like Zoo Lock, and there's like Reno Lock, there's Hand Lock, there's all kinds of like Warlock decks. Just because that hero power is so flexible, you you really have such a flexible way of drafting Warlock in Arena. You know, like you said, you can get any kinds of cards and kind of like put a Warlock deck together, and it'd be pretty strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think for me, Mage is probably still a little bit stronger, but I've had some better Mage luck. You just get to hold back, right? Like my thing with Mage is, and this is the topic that I've kind of really crystallized in my head over the course of the last week, which is that there's a lot of big stuff in the meta right now, right? Like we're talking about hand buffs with the paladins buffing stuff. Incidentally, hunters are going to get giant beasts, warriors are going to get a big card here or there. But the classes that have risen are warlocks and priests, and they all have big stuff. They've always had big stuff. You just never saw them before, and now they're kind of in the meta. So you have a lot of big stuff, much bigger stuff coming into the meta. And as the mage, you're one of the few classes that don't have big stuff, especially with Faceless Summoner taken out of the arena. You generally don't have very big things, and you're instead kind of playing off the board. And you have the hard removals to deal with a lot of the big things. So you're kind of in this really, you don't have good cards, right? Like there's no good, great like mage cards in this meta in MSG offering bonus, but your whole kit kind of works with what's rising in the meta right now in terms of your opponent's almost guaranteed to have big stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the thing. I find myself agreeing with Ratsmah, mostly just based on the drafts I've gotten with Mage. I haven't drafted many Mages at all. But yeah, it's just like, I guess I face the Mages at 9, 10, 11 wins, and, they have the Flame Strikes, the Fireland Portals, and the Ethereal Conjurers, and, I mean, I just never get that stuff. And I can imagine how good they are still, if you're able to draft the typical sort of control attrition mage draft, but I just never get those. So I'm just like, yeah, I can see how powerful they are. It just hasn't happened to me yet, right? So, but with Warlock, I'm like, oh man, it's so easy to get these powerful cards.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's flip it. What do you see in the meta? Do you see more mages? Do you see more warlocks? What are you having trouble with? What are you, I mean, they're obviously both really good classes.
I think there's been like such a drought of like Priest playing before this because Priest was so bad that like people are so happy that Priest is finally playable. It's arguable whether it's like one of the top classes now, but no one can argue with the fact that now it can actually compete with the other classes.
Yep.
So I have been seeing more diversifying classes being played by other people. Still a good number of like mages and rogues, and like Warlock definitely has become more popular.
Yeah.
Like the only class I see like not represented now is like Hunter and Warrior, and even then they're still played like slightly more than before.
Yeah, I think Hunter, Druid, and Warrior I don't see very often, but they are played more than Priest used to be, right? They're played more than like the bottom class usually gets played. So I think balance wise, from what I see, people are testing out new stuff, and it is kind of. I think the good classes are clear, but the bad classes are a little more muddled.
See, right after the expansion came out, I was so happy because everyone was testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I thought we saw so much diversity. Everyone was just playing every single class. Like some people wanted to try out the Goons, some people wanted to try out the Cabal, the Jade. A lot of people wanted to see how Jade was in the arena, right? So we saw like every single thing. And now it's like, all right, people have identified Warlock is really good, so you see a lot of Warlocks. People have fallen back on the Mage because they have confirmation that Mage is still really good. And hey, I played Mage a ton before, so I'm just going to play a ton of Mage now. You still see Paladins
everywhere.
Right. And it's not, I mean, Paladin has always been one of those classes in which the floor is really high, right? It's one of those classes that for people who are beginners in the arena or maybe don't play a lot of arena, it's a very comfortable pick because it has not as many choices as a class like Rogue, right? But it has like some really freaking powerful cards. Yeah.
But like on top of that now, they're the only ones with the new mechanic, right? We're talking about the primary new mechanic. It is hand buffs, and the class with the most hand buffs is Paladin. So on top of people being familiar with it, it being easy to, and straightforward to play, it's also the new and exciting class as far as people are concerned in terms of mechanics. So there's a ton of Paladins in the meta right now.
Yeah, I mean it's a fun mechanic. I'll say this, like the warrior card, the four drop. What is it called?
Gadgeteer, Grimy
Yeah,
Gadgeteer.
Gravity Gadgeteer. I love drafting that card. I think it's so powerful.
Seriously? Oh
Oh my
man,
god,
how?
yes.
What do you mean by so powerful? Like Yeti level powerful, or like
More,
Dark Iron
more,
Dwarf
more.
level powerful, or like Kraken
Like
level powerful?
depending on how you draft, once you get a couple of those and you get like an Argent Horse Rider offered, you start picking those Argent Horse Riders. You get one buff onto that thing. It's a 3 mana Argent Commander.
Yeah.
Like Divine Shield mechanics become much more broken. And yeah, I mean, like Warriors, that card's not gonna be as popular as like Smuggler's Run in Paladin
Mm.
or like the Hunter class cards that buff. But
Yeah.
it's
I think we currently have a rate of somewhere between like a Yeti and the average card. We have this giant tier list update that's going to come out probably tomorrow sometime, and we are moving up a lot of the hand buff ones. Like part of the thing I said this earlier, it's that things are big, and when things are big, a lot of things move around, and the hand buff mechanic it's better than we expected in terms of making things big. So these cards are all going to move up a little bit. But I have like just in my experience playing the Warrior, and I've played like a whole bunch of off-stream Warrior runs. It's not been good. Like first of all, Warrior hasn't been good. Period. Like we all knew it was going to suck, but it's sucking at a level that's even beyond how badly I thought Warriors were going to suck. And this one card, the Grimy Gadgeteer, it's not saving the Warrior from
No.
my ability to play it, because I have so much trouble getting onto the board that it never gets protected. I've very, very rarely had to see turn 2. I don't know if you've been like putting it behind taunts or if you were able to clear the board beforehand.
well, yeah. I mean, with Warrior, you get that 2-turn weapon, right? Most weapons have 2 durability. You kind of like clear board and then you protect it with the second charge, stuff like that. You can like set it up. Plus, today I just had a Sagoth, Sagoth and
okay.
Horse Rider deck with that card, so it felt pretty good. I think I ended up with what was it, like an 11-15 Sagoth, like a 13-17 Sagoth.
So
There's
all you
nothing
have
they
to
can
do, all you have to do is get the get that card, let it buff Saga. So first thing is casually just draft Sagoth, right? And then let it get buffed a few times and
Easy,
then
dude.
drop it.
Easy game.
Easy, so easy.
I mean, it's not just Sagoth. Like I said, any Divine Shield mechanic just
Right.
exponentially gets better.
Yeah.
Yeah. The problem with Warriors and like back in Karazhan when you had offering bonus to Fool's Bane, so you never had any issues with weapons, right? Like when you had offering bonus to weapons, Warriors always had the tempo lead, right? Potentially. They still had difficulty with flexibility, but if you had the necessary amount of weapons, along with a couple of like Blood to Ichors, Ravaging Ghouls to clean up, you could always win the tempo and then make that sort of turn 6, turn 7 like face push, right? And then win off of that. So they were sort of like half value oriented with a switch to always go face. And now it's just like you never get that early lead, which means you're mid game, like you have to use weapons more to kill their minions, and you can't make the switch, and they just end up dying. So like I've had a miserable time with Warriors recently.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's just the lack of a weapon with an offering bonus is killer.
Yeah.
It's killer. I think Blizzard needs to, like, unless they do, if this is happening before their giant like adjustment in the arena or whatever they're going, and we'll talk about that later as to like what we want from that. But Warriors always need a weapon on offering bonus, or else the class just sinks. Like, how quickly did the class go from like amazing cards all the time to like one expansion where they had like one card that wasn't great, and then one more expansion where they didn't get good cards, and all of a sudden they're the worst class again, right? Like they were knocking on the doors to like above average class before the last 2 expansions.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with just like the increase of like high tempo cards and things that do a lot of damage, like burst damage.
Mm-hmm.
You really can't keep even without those. It's like Smuggler's run in Paladin. You know, they get the tempo lead. You're bleeding. Your face
Yep.
is bleeding, and this is why you kind of see like we don't really talk about Druid or Rogue either. It's like
Mm-hmm.
they kind of seem weaker as well because they got to use their face to clear things,
Yeah.
and you just can't afford that anymore.
I think Rogue is a little okay because they have hard removal still. Like
Oh yeah,
they,
Rogue has always been like top tier, so
yeah.
it's like it's okay. But with Warrior,
Yeah, Warrior
this
has
might be trouble.
Execute as its hard removal, which has some issues, right? Druid has like what Naturalize as its hard removal, which has issues. Now Warlock has a common hard removal that's actually good, so they're out of this category. You have what Hunter with Deadly Shot, which is kind of, questionable, and those are with absolutely no coincidence. Those are your bottom three classes. They are the three remaining classes without very good hard removal that's very frequently seen in the arena. And this is the arena now. There's a lot of really big stuff you need to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, hard removal has become more and more important, right?
Mhm.
And unless it goes, it's like you said, the meta has become bigger, right? It's like we are so far away from GVG where it was just like, one, two, three, four, and then lethal.
Mhm.
Well, that was GVG right there. And we've moved so far away from that. Like OG was so slow. Karazhan didn't really, like speed it up. It just sort of changed the dynamic. It wasn't so much taunt anymore, but it's not like we sped up significantly. And now we're looking at these hand buffs, we're looking at these control type decks, and like this is just the game that Hearthstone Arena has become, and I don't see it shifting anywhere towards the opposite direction. So hard removals are, if they print a new one and give an offering bonus, and they give it to whoever, like now we say Warlock is arguably number one, they could do it for like any of the classes, and they will like jump or skyrocket up, right?
Yeah.
Because of the further sort of dilution of cards as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was actually very surprised when they gave Warlock the hard removal, but it kind of makes sense if they're trying to group it with the potion people and the the spellcasters. It's having that hard removal.
Man, it's just so wrong. I mean, I've seen you guys talk about how you feel about Twilight Flamecaller and how it kind of denies Mage that weakness of being rushed down early.
I hated it. Yeah.
And it's just like it doesn't play along with the identity of the class, which
I
every
lose
class
more
just
to
can't
that
have every single
card,
answer.
and
Yeah.
also the warrior one, the
Ravaging
ghoul.
Ghoul.
Yeah, Ravaging Ghoul. I lose more to those two cards than I think any other card in this entire game.
And it's not, you're not getting good odds to play around it usually,
No.
just because it's just one card in the entire.
You're almost never
attack.
playing around it unless you have unless they're actually equally good tempo options. Then you just play into it for no good reason, right? You would play around it. But that aside, you don't ever sacrifice even one stat worth of tempo to play around it. Your odds are bad, and so if they have it, you lose.
It's a violation of just the class's identity.
Yeah.
Is how I feel, and that's the same with Black Crystal Potion in Warlock. They should not have so many ways to burst out damage with like PO and Soulfire. Those should be the ways that they deal with slightly bigger things to get tempo, not things like Black Crystal Potion. And like even Siphon Soul is kind of not even that good of a hard removal because it costs 6, and generally that's like the biggest type of minion you'll see, so it's not a good tempo card. But
no, I totally agree. It's like, and Adotai and I were talking about this as well. It's like you get all these classes, and not only are you putting out so many cards, so it's hard to sort of guess, but it would be okay if you were limiting like the 600, 700, like 2,000 cards in the future to sort of this, a few sort of buckets, right? And they say a class can do these 3 things well, and these 2 other things not so well. But it seems like every class can do everything, and it doesn't even matter because it doesn't even matter what class you are. You can get cards from any other class now as well. So
let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. The other new mechanic Ratsmah was talking about, which is the Discover Tricard, the Tricard Discovery mechanic. Okay, how often have you been screwed by it versus how often has it saved your ass? Like, when you play it, on any of the 3 classes. I'm just calling them all the same card.
honestly, I don't feel like I've been hit by it too hard. Like I don't feel like I can tell by the way like I'm still smiling right now. I have not been screwed over by it.
Oh,
Uh, it is a cool mechanic. I
No
do
greater
enjoy
healing
it.
potions to prevent your lethals.
No, I do. I mean, that happens every once in a while, but it hasn't really bothered me. I don't see that as being like a huge impact, negative or positive. If anything, it'd be a slightly better, like positive impact, because I feel like it is a high skill card because there
Yes.
are certain cards that you could get from a specific class that would, bail you out. And I think that is the most important thing in Arena is the back and forth. You
Hmm.
should both be bailing you and your opponent should both be bailing out of bad situations and keep like making those comebacks. It should be a back and forth game where like before now it felt so one-sided where it's like, oh, this guy's winning, 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 and he won.
Yep.
But now I see a
yeah.
lot more comebacks on both sides, and it is such an exciting time to be playing Arena.
That's what the Cabal specializes in, coming back.
Yeah,
No,
Yeah.
it's definitely true, especially when you have all of these massive AoEs, right? And then like a lot of the top classes have just massive AoEs now, which definitely creates some good stories. And I think that's been sort of a pillar of what Blizzard wants to do, right? It just wants people to like go up to their friend and be like, "Oh man, you won't believe what happened in this game." So
yeah.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why like Hunter, I think actually does better than expected in this meta because you get to push all the Cabals. You get to push the face, and if you get it right before they kind of set up again, and they're using their discoveries, and they're like drawing more cards, and they're ready to like remove you off the board or taunt or whatever, and you just get just enough damage in. You can push pretty hard without going all in on like your one drops in your early game necessarily because you have a longer leash. There's a lot more interplay in this like late mid game that actually determines games. That if you're like going for an aggro or faster class, like I had some success with a Druid earlier in the week that just had a ton of small cards, and I had 3 like Mark of the Lotuses that just buffs everything. And that was my entire game plan. I didn't really have much else going for the deck. It wasn't like a terribly good deck, but it was very effective, and it just overran people because no one's doing stuff. So many people have cards that, like, if you're a Paladin, you have cards that buff your hand that you will eventually get value out of over a series of turns, right? If you're like Mage or like Warlock or Priest or whatever, you're waiting to set up and you're going to clear the board at some point, but if I can get you into lethal range before then, it doesn't really matter. So this like aggressive style is I think there's definitely room for it in this meta, just as there's room for like the slower styles, obviously, which compete on card advantage, as well as the mid-tempo style, which is the turn 8 push kind of happening. So it's a very diverse meta, even if a lot of the things that you're doing is based on what deck you've made rather than exactly what decisions you're making in the middle of the game.
Yeah, I mean, like if we're talking about Hunter specifically as like an aggro style class, which it most definitely is. You look at what classes are on top right now, like Mage and Warlock. Those,
Yeah.
those are really tasty treats for a Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Like the only class that really bugs you as Hunter would be like Paladin, like a very mid range or like slower Paladin deck with more heals,
Yeah.
and a Priest maybe that has really good early game. But even
Wow, a priest with
then,
really good early game will beat anybody.
oh sure, sure.
Like that's game over for you if he gets the early game.
But that's not a lot of issues for
Yeah,
Hunter.
yeah,
And usually the Paladins I've been seeing lately, I don't know if it's because the cards are fresh and new. They're all focused on their own game plan, which is
yes,
the whole like buff things in your own hand and do play proactively. And that kind of style does not really worry Hunters too much,
hmm
because they can just play around that and you push base, and all of a sudden, even though you're trying to push in lethal, the Hunter's got you by a turn because the hero power and just the cards are generally going to do a lot more damage.
yeah. Who cares if you spent
But
8 mana and put out like 3/6/7s, right?
exactly.
Like if I'm able to attack your face and get 8 damage in on the next turn, I'm set.
Yeah. It's surprising. I always thought of like Hunter as being weaker right now, but it does seem like there is definitely room to find like a very strong Hunter strategy
Mm-hmm.
in this meta.
yeah, I was actually talking to Shady yesterday on his stream, and he's basically been testing it out a lot, and he thinks that the winning strategy or the winning formula for Hunter is just it's actually like mid range, solid mid range, based around like shaky zip gunners, based around just like really beefy minions that have a high chance of sticking around for a turn, and then you can just go face with it. So base like
And keep in mind, mid range is not the average deck right now. The average deck right
yeah
now is late mid game.
yeah
Like
yeah
mid
yeah.
range is faster than the average deck.
But he warns against going too fast. Like how in some metas
Mm-hmm.
you wanted like 5 to 6 1 drops
Hello,
minimum.
Karazhan Firelands Portal meta.
Right. Yeah, like that was the counter to like the triple, quadruple Firelands Portal decks. And these days, apparently, what you should be doing is just drafting mid-range Hunter. So you go not as fast, so you don't run out as quickly, but you still go faster than the all the Cabal decks, which is the ones that
Yeah.
you're trying to beat with the slightly less aggressive than before, but more aggressive than
That's the thing with the
any other deck
Cabal.
that
They
they
could
put
remove
out.
you off the board, but it takes them a few turns to still like set up and do stuff, right?
Right,
Like so you
exactly.
have, and they don't clear your board until the late game to begin with, and then you have to set up and do stuff. Outside of what is that potion? Volcanic potion.
Yeah.
Like I don't get screwed over by the Cabal when I'm going aggressive. They can't deal with it.
But yeah, I mean, the existence of that potion makes you think twice. It seems like very. It seems like everything's been delayed a turn,
Mm-hmm.
where because of things like Volcanic Potion, even Abyssal Enforcer, and two very popular classes, you get that. You know, you know how you wouldn't normally push with your one drops. One drops are there to trade up, and then you might start pushing some base damage with your two drops. Now it seems like two drops are the one drops, and you use those to
Yeah.
trade up, so you don't play into AOE.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of see why the meta has slowed down. And
Yeah.
it's
No, it's a very good observation. That's a big consideration. The one drop that has an offering bonus heals both of your faces, so it's not used to go face anyways. Right? Like a lot of these things put together, and the fact that like hired gun is a taunt. So if it comes out, like you have to be really careful. Like if they have a 3/2, you have a 2/3, and you say, "Oh, I'm gonna go face." It's not just Shattered Sun that screws you over anymore. They put out
yeah.
a hired gun, and you're just like, "Okay, well, like I should have looked out for that because it has an offering bonus, and it's a pretty decent card that people draft all the time." So it's like, oh, okay, I should trade with the 3/2. Like all of these considerations are pushing games like much later than they might be.
Oh yeah, and I remember a long time ago. It was asked. I think it was on the Value Town podcast. We were talking about like favorite cards that were changing the meta, and I picked Scorpion Tentacle, and people were like, "What? Why would you
Yeah,
care
I
about
remember
Scorpion
that one.
Tentacle?" But it's a big deal
It,
because before then, what do you have? You have Gnomish Imagery, you have Silverback Patriarch,
mm-hmm.
and Ironfur Grizzly.
Yep.
Those are the
It
three
moved the
taunts.
taunt
None of
meta
them are
from 4
popular.
mana to 3 mana.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and then you get this actual pickable 3-drop taunt.
Mm-hmm.
It's a game changer.
Yep.
It's common. It changes the way you play the opening turns.
Yep. And it's that
Yeah.
kind of impact. A lot of like if you look at the tri-class cards, which all the classes have one of, they're all anti-tempo. Your discovery cards are anti-tempo. Your class base cards are the Grimy Goons one is the most tempo based one, and it's a subpar 3-drop that buffs something in your hand. The other two are like even worse, right? One is like a draw essentially with the random potion, and the other one gives you a Jade Golem, but it only is on tempo if you already had another Jade Golem out to begin with, so it probably won't be. So you have these like generally decent cards, and they're going to get picked, and they're fun to use, but they're helping slow things down, and everything's just slowing things down, which is good. Like I want to emphasize that at least from where I'm sitting, and I think this is one of the reasons why I think we all agree that this is a pretty fun meta to play in. It's that your turns matter now past turn 4. Your turn 5 is hugely important. Your turn 7 is insanely important. I don't know if I've won the game by turn 8 or 9 usually. And that has rarely been the case before this. Before this, if it's like turn 8, I could say with like 80-85% accuracy who has won the game at that point. Just by looking at how many cards they have, what the board state is, and what classes they are. That's it.
Oh yeah, now you don't know. And getting back to that, part of that is because of these discover mechanics and the potion mechanics, you definitely have more of a dynamic play style where you might be ahead on board in the early turns, like you were talking about, it's like turn 4 or 5, but you still don't know if you get a discover card that's a little bit slower, then you might change up your game plan, and you got to expect that from your opponents as well. And so you're never really that sure of how you should be playing, and you kind of play a little bit more reactively. You kind of try to read what he has, which makes for a much more fun back and forth game.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, and it's kind of disgusting how like warlocks can play something like Demon Wrath into Hellfire into like a Sludge Belcher. I'm just like, God, I hate you so much. Like
Warlocks do so many disgusting things right now.
I don't know. They can, right? Or they can either play that way, or they can start off with the Flame Imp followed by 2-drop, 3-drop, and then Implosion, and then afterwards they have all the big stuff to back it up. But yeah, you really do have to play around all of these new cards. You have to play around the new playstyle, and when you're drafting as well, you have to, like, before it was always about like, how do I beat the mages? How do I beat the mages? And now it's sort of like, well, I have to consider quite a few things, right? I have to consider the mage, I have to consider the warlock. You still need some early game, otherwise like priest just totally runs through you as well.
I've thought about this before because I keep facing a lot of paladins all the time, and I don't mind it. Paladins are great to face because they have all this new stuff, and I'm trying to like develop more and more precise strategies for how to deal with all these handbuff things. And we'll talk about Smuggler's run on Card Good Bad next, actually. But when I'm doing that, I keep thinking, how amazing would paladins be if warlocks were not like the top or second top class in the meta? Because warlocks so hard counter paladins in so many ways in terms of what the paladin's trying to do right now, and that's one of the few things that's like still keeping the paladins like in check. Your other stuff like hunter or whatever, they're not really in the meta. Like you can be a hunter and do well against a paladin if they don't heal, but you don't see it out there, right? Mages don't do too much against a paladin. Priests are like losers against a paladin because paladins are that one tempo step faster than priest. And you're just like, paladins are, I think they're the most interesting class right now in the meta because of this new mechanic, and a lot of things revolve around them because of how frequently they're picked. Like none of us think they're one of the top classes, but they're good, they're above average, and they're seen, I would say, about as often as mages and warlocks.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point. With paladins, like, you would have a spider problem if you didn't have some cats around, and definitely warlocks are those cats. Like, without warlock keeping paladins down, oh man, it would be so oppressive to have someone, especially when you go higher up in the wins. This is going to be more consistent, is proactive playstyles working out, because they'll have decks more fine-tuned that got them there to the high wins, and you can expect them to play Smuggler's Run really early and play on curve. And that is such an oppressive style, since you don't get much counterplay when they're generally just playing, a 2-drop that's a 3-4 or a 4-5, and into a 3-drop that's a 4-5 or a 5-6.
Just one after the other. There's not much you can
do. Yeah.
And then they play that Grime Street Outfitter like as a curve card because it's now like a 3-3 and it buffs everything else. Yeah.
I mean, it's good that Warlocks are around because of that. Because Warlock does, and I think Warlock is a good class to be one of the top. Because it is not oppressive. Because if you do draw bad as Warlock and you don't get your 1 or 2 drops, you taking face damage is a huge deal. It ruins your game plan of actually using your hero power to win, and that is such a critical thing for Warlocks. So, I mean, I'm perfectly fine with Warlock being the strongest class right now, or one of the strongest, because of that. Like, it is dependent on RNG and their draw ordering, but it does not make them unbeatable, as you'll see with like different classes with good decks.
Yes. No, I think that's definitely true. And it's like when Mage has super value cards and is like, basically when Karazhan had an offering bonus, right? Like, people were complaining a lot about Mage. And part of the reason is like too much removal, too much flexibility, and they still had the ability to hold off your aggression in the early game, right? So it's like they have no weaknesses. With Warlock, you see the weaknesses and their inflexibility, and like there are clear ways to take advantage of that. So no, I totally agree with what you're saying. Like, it's okay to have a powerful class as long as there are very distinct sort of areas to exploit from that class, and not just like mages with increased offering odds to like Twilight Flamecaller and Immortal. I know
that was the biggest offense, man. Because Mage used to be what Warlock is now, like very powerful, but Signa had that weakness. You could rush a Mage down very easily.
Yep.
But with Twilight Flamecaller, now it's just like, oh man, turn 3 or turn 5 rolls by, and you got your fingers crossed.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to card good bad, and then we'll talk about how to deal with paladins before we go into more like general arena like things. So card good bad, where we tell you whether a card is good or bad. Ratsmah picked this one, and it is probably the card of MSG. It's not the best card of MSG, but it is one of the most impactful cards that we see in the meta due to how often it is played, and that is Smuggler's Run. So why don't you kick it off, Ratsmah? What do you think about this card?
It is a tough card to play against. I think when you face up against a paladin, you kind of have to like redo your mulligan strategy, and you might want to keep in mind in your draft as well. Like whereas like normal like spider tanks and yetis on curve might get value like hit in and then survive, you gotta expect that they're gonna be eaten in one shot. So you gotta like plan for a turn where you kind of like don't have to trade that minion in, or you can use it to trade up with some kind of buff. So it does change the game in the way that you don't expect to play Curvestone anymore, because you lose Curvestone against that card.
There is like once your opponent's hand is buffed, there's no more Curvestone, because you don't know what your opponent is going to do, and they can over curve and basically play like a Fel Reaver equivalent on any turn that they can come out. Paladin's less big, but same idea, right? They play Pit Fighter turn 4, Spider Tank turn 2, whatever. And you got to expect that. And so that's the meta now. And I think that's a really interesting point that you brought up, which is that Curvestone, at least when it comes to what your expectations are, it's dead against these hand buff classes as soon as they buff anything. Like, you get a nice little warning, right? Like, they have to play the card, and then their hand is all shiny, and you know exactly which cards are still remaining that needs to be played. But now, all of a sudden, you're playing a different game. So how do you play that game? You're facing against Smuggler's Run. They've either Smuggler's Run turn 1, or they Smuggler's Run, like, let's say, turn 3 with a 2-drop to create their own Spider Tank, but now the rest of their cards are still buffed. Like, what do you do now if you know your opponent has, like, 2 or 3 cards that are buffed, and you are on turn 3, 4, 5, one of your curve turns?
I mean, the way I see it is, surprisingly enough, I see decks that are very strong with hand buffs as being control decks. They take that initial tempo loss only to regain it later. So what I had success with is pushing them. Like, you really need to push tempo at that point, especially since a lot of these decks, and you get to see how many spells and weapons they have as opposed to minions when they get the buffs. You really can push because they're mostly going to be minions in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get as punished as much, and you got to make the right trades.
Right.
You got to make the right trades against them.
So when you say tempo, you just mean putting as many stats out onto the board as possible and hitting their face.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, they don't get that tempo until they play out all those cards.
Mm-hmm.
But and that's why they're playing control, trying to survive to that point where that tempo is fulfilled.
Yeah. And I think in this meta, something that that also I really like the hand buffs because of this. The stuff with higher attack than defense in the mid game, like when you're talking 3 or 4 drops, like maybe your Ancient Shades or your Salty Dogs or your Ice Ragers, they're pretty good now. Because if your opponent's going to go, your opponent is guaranteed to not necessarily out-tempo you, but they have a tempo advantage going into the next like 2-3 turns. Because they're going to play these cards that have +1/+1 on what they should get. So you know they're going to be tempoing. Whether they want to or not, that's just what's going to happen. They've already made the commitment. So when they're doing that and they don't have spells, especially if it's a paladin when you don't have a lot of spells to begin with, then having a lot of the high attack stuff helps you deal with and trade efficiently with their like giant 5/6s coming out, right? If they have a giant 5/6, you find a way to deal 1 damage, you play an Ice Rager. Well, that 5/6 may have only cost 3 mana, but you've also basically only may have only cost 4 mana, but you've also only put in 4 mana's worth of stuff into it, and you do that by not having defense, by not wasting your stats on health. Because what happens if you put out a Yeti? Your Yeti's dead.
Yeah.
Right. No. The typical vanilla stats that you want are definitely not what you want when you're facing hand buffs. Yeah. But I mean, does that mean that you draft those cards more often, like Ice Ragers, like Ancient Shades?
Well, I mean,
like,
they're still crap against non-hand buff classes.
Right. So how far are we willing to go here? That's the thing.
Rock, paper, scissors. This is the rock, paper, scissors meta.
Oh, I don't know about that. I think okay. I think there's certain types of synergies with if you start drafting like Ice Rangers, you got to have a fallback plan against those other classes where it's not good.
Yeah.
You got to have like good AOE to protect it, good weapons, or good like whatever things to protect it from trading down. And I think this brings a lot more skill into drafting an arena where you can identify that you can take an Ice Ranger here over something as like a Harvest Golem that's been, historically very strong and very safe to pick. You could never go wrong with. But when you bring in this hand buff mechanic where it changes the way and how fast and the pacing of the game, there's a lot of skill involved in the drafting process where you can kind of be like, hey, this is a position where Ice Ranger could be strong. There's little punish for picking this because I already have certain cards in my deck, or I can expect to play a certain way. So I think it's extremely high skill to be able to like draft dynamically with the thought of hand buffs.
Yeah, and especially, I think this applies more because this is still, like, Paladin is only really one class that this affects, right? Warrior, sort of a little bit, Hunter a little bit more, but you don't see them all that much. So you have to also know that these are not the best things against, like, let's say a Warlock or a Mage or something, right? So with that in mind, I think this is a drafting consideration if you have some normal drops already, right? If you have, like, 3/3/4s, you may see another 3/4, and you may really just rather have an Ice Ranger at that point, because you have two of them in your hand at some point, need to play something for 3 mana, you're expecting something big incoming, and you just want to play that Ice Ranger. And if you don't, you may have the option of still playing the 3/4, because you have so freaking many of them already, because that's what you've been favoring up to this point.
Yeah, it's a good thing. I mean, the flexibility of playing that Ice Ranger over a 3/4 or 3/4 over Ice Ranger it's choices that you're getting. And when you get choices and what wins you the game is not playing the best card, but playing the right card,
Yes.
that makes the game so much more fun and rewarding when you do win. Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so that's Card Good Bad Smuggler's Run. Anything else you guys want to say about Smuggler's Run? It's kind of a really interesting card in the way it's designed.
It is really interesting because, okay, so I love the fact that you can see like what cards are in their hand. Otherwise, I would think it is the worst design card in existence because it's sort of like it's like Ratsmah said. After they play Smuggler's Run, they're kind of playing Solitaire, right? Like they kind of like are like, oh, okay, now I have my turns planned out. Now I'm gonna do this. And if they have a handful of minions, they are just playing Solitaire because they're not interacting with your board. You have your like battle cry minions, but mostly they're just putting stuff down, and it's up to you to determine what to do with those minions. But the fact that you can see how many minions it buffed and like what cards it buffed and like how early they drew those minions, it gives you sort of something for you to do.
It's very important when it comes to the Paladin, which like reveals their entire hand to you essentially, like the generalities of it.
I think that aspect is the saving grace of the card, and I'm like, okay, it gives you as the person sitting across from this the Paladin something to do. Otherwise, if they just play Smuggler's Run and you get no information, I'm like, nope, worst card in existence. They're playing Solitaire. I'm trying to just like survive and play, but I have no information. So I think adding that aspect is fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean, at that point, it's like a full information game, right? You know exactly how many minions and spells, weapons they have. You can expect kind of the stat line they're playing for each turn. You got to. I think it's just good practice to like know exactly how to play against that robot, pretty much, which is going to play the exact same way no matter what.
Yeah, and this also makes, you were talking about this earlier with the warrior and getting that Argent Horse Rider buffed. Like, if you have charge minions, they're really freaking... One, they're good when you buff them, but two, they're also really deceptive if you're in a Paladin and it gets buffed. Because if your whole hand is minions, they know you don't have spells. They're making... Like, if they're a good arena player, right? They're making these calculations. They're taking these calculated risks, and you can punish them hard with a removal. Because you don't have removals. You don't have removals in your hand. But, oh, there's that Bomb Squad. There's that Argent Horse Rider. There's that Argent Commander, and you totally ruin what your opponent's trying to do. And your opponent has to try to do like risky stuff, right? Because you buffed your hand. You're about to come back and destroy them in a big way. So it's a very interesting dynamic, which is why I don't mind facing Paladins. I keep like trying to figure out what the like right percentages are, what the right like move is based on the information. And we actually, like, for the tier list, we created a new, like, a much more sophisticated hand buff mechanic now that we played with it for a while. And one of the things that it actually does take into consideration is the information being shown. And I didn't want to add that in the beginning, but then I realized if I didn't add it, these cards are going to go crazy on the model in terms of how powerful they are. So Smuggler's Run is only moving up 5 points now, as opposed to if this wasn't the case, which it would be, like, just this insane, like, always pick kind of card.
All right. So should we move on to question from the GOAT?
Yeah, let's do a question from the GOAT.
Question. All right. So I'm going to preface question from the GOAT by saying when Ratsmah and I guess Advocate was there too, but who cares about that? But when we were at BlizzCon, we had a good discussion with Ixar that night, right? And we kind of discussed sort of stuff that Blizzard is thinking about for the future of the arena, and it seemed like they were really curious as to what we thought about sort of making arena standard versus wild, and sort of how we should deal with class diversity and class balance. So after that talk, basically, Ratsmah, what do you not just what you want them to do? What do you think they're going to do with the arena?
What do I think they're gonna do?
Yeah, which is different from what you want, because we've sort of asked the what you want question, right?
We all know what we want. We want so many things. All the arena players want so many things, and they're all good.
Right.
And they all don't, so they've got varying levels of difficulty to accomplish. But what do you think Blizzard is actually going to do? Because they have plans. They have a plan in place.
Honestly, I don't, not to bash on Blizzard, but I think Blizzard's main thing is for Arena is to keep it as like a fun mode, less competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're just going to keep adding more fun ways to play. Maybe not like, it's how much skill does it take to draft a deck with like 8 or 9 Jade cards,
Mm-hmm.
just they're just going to add more crazy things. What I wish Blizzard would do with Arena is maybe, to keep, and this is the problem we were talking about earlier with like class identity. Maybe like keep those like separate. Make sure that every class is unique from one another, and you don't just make them blend together with giving them so many different options in class cards and spells and minions.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess a follow-up question. So you talked about Twilight Flamecaller a lot, and you take that away from Mage because that gives them that early game kind of like power that makes the Mage now go from early game to the late game having power throughout the whole thing. Volcanic Potion kind of in the same vein. Would you remove other cards from other classes? Because we know Blizzard can do that, right? And we think Blizzard's probably going to. That's like one of their only tools for balancing the arena right now. And so they're not going to remove MSG cards, right? They're not going to remove MSG cards in the MSG meta, but maybe they'll remove it in the future. So we've had 2 expansions now, Karazhan and MSG, that don't have cards removed yet, which Blizzard might be considering removing after these sets have passed. What cards in MSG or Karazhan would you remove from the meta once we hit the next expansion?
Honestly, I don't think it's so important to remove. And this is what you see with like Mage. Instead of like removing Twilight Flamecaller, they made that threat more evident with things like Volcanic Potion. And they're just giving certain classes more of what they've already had. Warlock gets more damage removal. Felfire Potion. They got Abyssal Enforcer. Maybe just them adding more cards of that type, being very similar, is enough to kind of ignore the fact that they have slightly different answers, but most likely the answer that they're going to have is along the lines of what they've always had. With the AoE Mage, and you can kind of, if that is the case, then even if you don't remove specific cards, you will still get the same feel playing that class and playing against that class as well.
Sure. So I kind of get what you're saying. Like, it's kind of Blizzard not taking back Twilight Flamecaller. It's just like, well, they have it now.
Doubling down.
Yeah, let's double down on it. And because of, we're adding these cards, they used to not have this early game AoE. Let's just give them early game AoE and make it sort of on their like staples.
Yeah.
Or
and I mean, it's worth it to know that they always had early game AoE. It just wasn't good. Like,
Right.
They've always had Arcane Explosion. Twilight Flamecaller is to Arcane Explosion what I guess, kind of the same deal as Maelstrom Portal, in that it's just a better version of a card that kind of exists. And like Blizzard's doubled down since then, right? Volcanic Potion, same thing. So I guess my question is, how do you prevent that from just making all the classes kind of the same?
I think we kind of go overboard with saying that maybe certain classes don't have weaknesses and that all the classes mesh together. Because I mean, even with like adding early game removal for a mage, you mentioned this earlier, being a thing about mages is that they don't have big threats.
Yeah.
They don't have a big threat of a class card. Generally the best like big threat would be like a Firelands Portal or an Ethereal Conjure, but really that doesn't give you something huge. It doesn't give you a value minion, and I think. With this change, it's no longer you rush the mage down. Now you just have to keep your eyes open for that. So it's the weakness of certain classes kind of developing and evolving and changing. So, maybe it's not such a bad thing. And maybe we just have to understand how these classes are changing and what kind of effects these new cards that which seem very damaging to the class's identity kind of change the class itself, and you can find another weakness, a different weakness to try to exploit and, like win games.
Cool. So I want to bring up something that I heard you say on your stream earlier on. Someone asked you about a leaderboard, right? And your answer was basically, it's like, I don't really think they'll introduce a leaderboard because it makes people feel bad, right? Like, and it puts pressure on them to maybe do well. And like you said, Blizzard wants people to sort of just casually play Arena and feel good about themselves, and then it doesn't really matter because it's not recorded anywhere. I thought that was an interesting perspective, sort of like, just number one, keeping Arena as just sort of like the pure sort of like playground that it is, right? And not elevating it to competitive. But also, elegant. I mean, if they do that, then they would also, by that same token, have to make it standard, right? Because if you care about how these sort of mobile players and casual players feel, then I mean, wouldn't it just be like too overwhelming for them to play with, like, I don't know how many cards there are in the set now. Like, is it 800? And then there'll be like 1,000, 2,000 cards. Like, don't you have to make a standard at some point?
Yeah, and that goes along with kind of like splitting the like player base, right? You don't want people so intimidated with like new cards, be like, oh, I don't know the old cards. Now there's new cards. How am I going to play the arena? Where in Constructed, you kind of just make a deck. All you have to know is the decks that are being played in the meta. You don't even have to know that. You can kind of just know your own deck and try to do your own game plan. But with
everyone's
Arena,
a paladin now.
yeah, it is very intimidating, and you add that on top of the fact that you have a leaderboard now, and that's going to stay in your account or whatever, however you feel. It makes the arena game mode a lot less attractive, and already I would say there's not enough players playing arena, compared to Constructed. So I mean, that's the reason why I feel like they probably won't want to kind of address the problem of not having a leaderboard, and not even want to make one. It just splits the player base.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
I think there's also the issue with arena costing gold, and until you get infinite, you can't just keep playing arena whenever you want to, which is not that big of a deal because you have quests and things like that you can complete to get gold, and then arena is actually like a gold making kind of vehicle once you get to a certain point. But I think about Overwatch, right? Like, and competitive Overwatch versus free play Overwatch, right? Or like casual, I don't know what they call that mode right now. But like, both see play. There are people who only play casual, there are people who only play competitive, there are people who play like, some of some. There are people who take competitive seriously. There are people who play competitive but don't take it very seriously. They just like to see their ranking when they're playing, and they don't really care too much. And I get frustrated when they're on my team. But that aside, I think it's a pretty good balance, because it gives the people who care about like tracking their rank or like whatever something to do, and at the same time it's not like shoving, like the score you actually always see. But I don't think if you're really casual about something like the arena or whatever, you wouldn't just like, I don't think the fact that they're giving you a score or a leaderboard or anything like that will drive you away
Yes, it's just a small component of it, and like those aren't the only barriers to entry for the arena. It's
Mhm.
like you said, you need to pay gold to
Yeah.
play. It's constructed. You can play whatever you own the cards,
Yeah.
but when you're paying gold and sometimes real money, $2 per run, and it feels like you just get smashed and destroyed, it doesn't make you want to play the game. And this is why, and this is actually what I think why Blizzard made Firelands Portal, and this is my theory. This is why Portal is a common card
The
is to
profit
make
making
one of the
machine.
easier class, make one of the easier classes even stronger. That way, when more experienced players are more willing to try out different classes, the players that don't feel as comfortable they will pick Mage and will pick Firelands Portal and get a couple of free wins. Sometimes go over 7, sometimes get 12 wins and get their gold
Hmm.
back. It's much more satisfying, and it does keep the community healthy because you got your newer players, you got your weaker players playing right by the stronger players and veterans, and they feel like they have a chance.
Yeah.
I think you talked about this on the previous Lightforge as well. You were just like, there's actually an importance in Mage or Paladin, like easy to play classes, consistently being strong, right? Like there is a consideration for keeping them strong because you want these players who maybe just play a run here or a run there, or these new players who just pick up the game. You want them to have a good fallback, right? Like you want them to be able to like pick up this one class and just know that, okay, this is an always pick card, and then when they reach that turn, they just play that card and they always have a decent chance of winning from there. Which is frustrating, but I do understand, like, if you want to talk about it from a business policy, I can definitely see that. Yeah.
That's why Mercy exists in Overwatch. You just hold down left click and right click.
Oh God,
You
Mercy
you
is
gotta
so,
appeal to more players.
Bad Mercy is so bad.
so bad, so bad. It's so hard to play.
Because it's all about the ult, man.
Yeah, but you do like it is an easier character mechanically, and that does introduce like much friendlier environment for newer players, and I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Yeah. I think a lot of these problems could be solved if we just kind of create a higher barrier of entry and create a separate pool with no barrier of entry. So part of the problem is the business model, right? Like, how does Blizzard make money in the arena? They make it by charging a fee.
Oh.
So
okay.
that's the main problem, or else you would just be like ranked, right? You'd just be able to play whatever you want, and you just wouldn't get the pack at the end of the game or whatever. You get lesser rewards, right? They'd even it out somewhat. But as long as, if Arena will always give you rewards and will never take rewards away from you, and you get the cards, right? Because you don't need to, like, buy packs to get cards to play in the arena, then there's absolutely nothing Blizzard's getting from this financially. So instead, I think the whole Brawl Arena thing was a very interesting experiment. I don't know how much money they made off of that, but I'm hoping a crap ton. Because what I'm hoping Arena does is it splits into two modes. One of which is, and I don't really care if it's Wild or Standard, but Standard should probably be made just to lower the overall barrier of entry, and we don't really need Wild. But regardless, one being totally free, kind of like ranked, and you just don't get a lot of rewards for it, but you get to play in the arena. Like, maybe you can make it even get smaller rewards than normal ranked play would. While the other one is the same exact game, and I think that's very important. It has to be the same exact game, but it costs like 1,000 gold, or just some gold sink levels of gold. And you're basically betting this gold, right? Like, Blizzard will take away some of it, but if you do well, you will still be able to beat your rake, kind of. And so if you're a serious arena player, you will always pay the ridiculous amounts of gold. And if you're not, you have another arena-like or limited format style that you can play without, like, a lot of the penalties. And so even if you're just a regular player and you play normal arena, you still want to poke your head in to the higher challenge style just to see how good you are, right? Like, I think everyone will kind of, you don't do it very often, but you'll do it sometimes. And especially if you're a pure arena player, you don't care that much about the gold because your collection doesn't really matter too much. So it creates this gold sink at a higher skill level, and it isolates us into a pool where we can beat up on each other, and then, we can all average 5 wins instead of 7. And it lets people, one, practice the arena, which is huge, right? You can't practice the arena now without being hugely penalized. And two, you can do it in an environment in which Blizzard doesn't lose as much, right? Because right now, and you don't lose as much. Like, I can't imagine starting the arena right now. It would be a horrible, horrible experience, and I would have to spend a ton of gold.
I think that could go like one of two ways. Like depending on how the player base acts when that kind of like split model is introduced. Like it could bring a lot of constructed players to try out the new free arena, but it could also split the people playing arena now into like half them playing the free one and the other playing the the
that's
one
the
that
goal.
you actually pay for. I mean, but the problem with that is if we don't have that many players queuing up for the paid one, then you're going to be facing up against the same strategies that are overpowered. It's going to be a lot more mages and warlocks and dominating classes being picked because this is now worth something, and everyone is tryharding in that mode because there's already a casual mode, and this is what you see with other games like Overwatch. You see the same heroes being picked, and it becomes less fun when everyone is tryharding, and in a game like Hearthstone where there's not too much skill involved and everyone's like the cards kind of play themselves and they're drafting the same and playing the same, you will get pretty sick of the same games being played out. And this is the reason why I don't like constructed as well. It's because it feels like every game is the same and it plays out the same. But like
maybe you don't get to pick your class in the hardcore mode.
Oh, sure. That's
wow. Okay.
Because it's hardcore mode. You should know the game, and it's locked for people, right? You have to like, I don't know, get X number of wins in the regular casual arena before you're allowed in the hardcore mode, even if you have
yeah, play a little bit hard to get. Like, oh, you can't play me yet.
Yeah.
And then that'll actually make them want to play. Okay,
Exactly.
I like it.
Well, and it's something to strive towards, right? Like you can play the we could say go over tier or the casual mode for a while, and you're like, no, like. And even if you don't think you're ready, it's sort of like it's like a heroic tavern brawl, right? Like maybe you're not like top 50 legend every single season, but are you willing to spend 1,000 gold just to like get in there and number one, try to like get the adrenaline rush, and number two, just see how you match up with all.
And maybe not
else,
1,000. 1,000 seems high. Maybe more like 300 or something, but like a higher amount of rake than 100.
I definitely think there's the right way to do it, and if they do that successfully, Arena will be a lot better. It's just the fear of splitting the player base is just such a big threat.
Yeah.
Like I've played games that are like nearly dead. Like right now, I still play Heroes of New Earth every once in a while, and when you queue up, it is the same people that you queue up with and against, and everyone's doing the same thing that they did last game, and like it's just not a fun experience when that's the case. And if you end up like that with Arena at the expense of Arena, and you see the same people and same guys playing the same classes, it takes away from the pure Arena experience, which is sometimes you get wrecked by this guy who doesn't even know what he's doing. He doesn't even know how to play with.
That feels so bad. That's happening more now because it's more random now than it was before.
Yeah. I love it. I don't know.
You were talking about a 1-3 warrior run you had earlier, and I had a 1-3. I don't know. I don't think it was warrior, but it was like a priest. I had a 1-3 priest run like earlier in the week, and it was just like the deck was bad, but it wasn't anywhere near that bad. And I was trying, and I wasn't like I was making huge misplays, and I was not facing the most amazing players either. I was just losing, like steadily losing in a way where I'm like, oh god, I'm gonna lose this game. We're gonna lose this game. We lost this game.
Yeah, it's honestly that is part of the Hearthstone experience, is losing to people who don't know what they're doing, and you get to rant about it, to your friends.
I lost to a Backstreet Leper. Like he
God.
played him, and it was like okay, and the rest of his deck had like there was that 07 demon thing. That like I was like deciding whether to kill or not, or to go face, and then it ended up wrecking me. Because he like lightning stormed afterwards because I left it up for a turn or something like that. It was just.
Sounds like you got outplayed, man. I don't think that guy was new.
I think I did get outplayed, but I don't know, right? I don't know if I got outplayed or if he was just like doing random things. I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. All right. So we should move on to a topic that I can relate to. You guys are talking about getting 1-3s and like getting bad RNG and just like losing in general. And let's talk about something that all three of us can relate to. Yeah. Anyway. Warrior?
Warrior? All right. Class talk, Warrior. Okay. So we'll end this with a class talk on the worst class, or one of the worst classes, depending on where your perspective is on this. And we're going to play a Warrior run after this on the Coop. We don't want to, but the Warrior came up, and so we need to play the Warrior. Warrior in the worst place. Warrior in the absolute worst place right now that it has been since before LOE. And how do you do, like, we've all played a bunch of Warrior leading up to this. So one, what is your problem as the Warrior? Like, why can you not do normal Warrior things? Like, sure, we don't have great cards, but like the cards the Warriors got aren't like unplayable or anything like that. So what is missing from the Warrior right now in this meta?
A card to replace Public Defender.
Okay, but you just don't pick that card. Yeah, it's bad. It's screwing up the offering odds.
It's basically giving you like 5 picks per draft that could be other cards, like an actual card, right?
It's giving you like 1 pick per draft, a little more than 1 pick per draft.
All right,
That's the actual offering odds.
One Public Defender.
Yeah, this is 70 for 2. I mean, maybe we just have to think about how we play it. Like, generally, you want the early game board presence as a warrior to help you chip damage in with weapons to actually make the right number of damage to actually get the perfect amount of tempo. But now with Volcanic Potion, all these like small AoE things, you kind of get punished for that, trying to lead as warrior and using your weapons as supplementing damage. So maybe we have to move away from that and play more of a reactive style warrior.
Yeah,
problem.
But how do you match the people for card advantage or tempo when they have bigger things than you? Like, if you're against a Paladin, they have bigger things. You have no hard removals. When you're against a Mage or whatever, right? Like, they have the hard removals and everything, and again, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, before it was weapons, and I still think it is weapons. I think it's just the ordering in which you play it has to be a little bit different. Like, you should still try to get weapon value off Warrior. That's the whole theme of Warrior, is if you can get that weapon to hit twice, then usually you'll end up with tempo and value. But, you know, I'm not saying I got to solve it. I definitely don't. It's, you just gotta like play somewhat drastically different, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The normal style of getting a whole bunch of 2s and like having enough weapons and trying to push face, it doesn't work as well because your opponent stabilizes enough and you can't clear with the weapon. It really sucks when you're like, when I'm facing a Paladin and they drop a 5/6 on turn 4. I'm like, I can't do anything now. My whole entire game plan is ruined. I can never remove that thing. It's going to kill 2 of my things at least. I can still push face, but I'm not going to finish it off. I don't have any like guaranteed reach. Like, if they just put up any taunts, I'm not going to win this card advantage battle because even their 1 mana cards give +1/+1 to like 3 minions. Like, I feel like I'm starting off in a hole, and I can't get out of it with tempo, and I don't have enough reach to finish the job. And so, I don't know, maybe card draw? Maybe I just need like a lot of card draw?
No, because your inflexibility catches up with you, right?
Yeah.
Like, because the more turns that you play, the more you're going to be exposed to that one turn in which they have that like 6/1 minion with a 3/1 minion as well, and you're just like, I can't do anything about this. Like, there's nothing I can do. I only have big minions in my hand. If I don't drop it, they go face. I'm dead. If I drop it, then I'm giving up like a pit fighter to a 6/1, right? And it's just so miserable. Like, the life of a warrior is so miserable because if you can't play for tempo because they stabilize, if you don't get enough weapons, but at the same time, if you're trying to play for the late game without the large removals and without the flexibility that other classes have, you can't do anything, which is what it feels like with a warrior.
I think like one of the great additions to this expansion is Kooky Chemist. You know, it's such a subtle thing, but as like a priest or a warrior, you fitting that damage and you flipping for making it like 1 or 2 less attack or 1 or 2 more attack does make your trades as a non-ping class a lot more flexible. So I think that's a great add. And I think this goes along with the whole warrior thing where, you know, you are so inflexible, and with the power creep, generally your weapons are not clearing on curve, which is a huge problem because that's the whole like soul and essence of warrior. So you got to kind of like pick more things like Kooky Chemist, Blowgill Sniper, maybe more cleaves and slams to help make your, you know, help get your weapons there to the point where they can actually be effective.
I don't think we're passing up cleaves and slams in order to pick more of them.
I mean, I always pick them, but no, I understand what you mean. Like, those are the cards you need.
It needs stuff, and it's not getting them in the draft right now without, like you said, right, the huge change in strategy. I don't know. I'll be testing out more stuff. There's a long road to this meta, and things will get better once they get rid of the MSG offering bonus. But I don't know if it's gonna get that much better because the offering bonus is not that high, and maybe I am very excited to see whenever they get rid of this O2 thing from the game, like in the arena, because I feel like that's one of those cards that will be removed as soon as it is not MSG meta. Like, it is so bad and unplayable.
The 2 mana 07?
Yeah, the 2 mana 07.
Oh, okay. If it was an O2 for 2 mana.
Oh, did I say O2? Sorry.
Wow.
Blizzard really dropped the ball on that one.
Overcosted target dummy without a mech tag on it? Yeah, that
sounds like a warrior card.
It's Ruby Meg without the death rattle.
Yeah.
So good, man.
I mean, maybe it is a good card. Maybe in the right kind of drafting style, the 2 mana 07, the Public Defender, can be a good card.
With coin, turn 1, coin still in goods, turn 2, 310.
Yeah, exactly. You get buffs as well. You get the whole like cool task, rampage. Maybe that's the kind of style we have to try to go for when available.
Stolen Goods is moving up 26 points on the tier list in the next update to 44, which is actually sort of draftable sometimes. And because under the new system, I've figured out more stuff, and it's not like. So one of the things that was actually really interesting when I was when I created the new like algorithm, well the back end to the tier list for hand buffs, is it takes into actual consideration the curve turns and how it helps your curve after the turn the card is actually played on, and the turns in which you can play the card. So think about Stolen Goods, which is, people may not actually know what this card does. It is 2 mana +3/+3 to a taunt card in your hand. Assuming you only have one taunt card in your hand, you can actually turn that taunt card into a curve card that is over curved and still has taunt, right? So on turn 6, if you have like, let's say, a Senjin, it will become a 6/8 taunt, which is a bog creeper on turn 6. Like, sure, you use a card to do it, but you can do that, and you can do it like under your control, right? So it actually, like, you do have to hold on to it. It's like kind of inflexible, but when you get it out, it's generally like worth it.
Yeah, and think about how similar that card is to Smuggler's Run.
Yeah.
It's just all impacted onto one instead of, split into all your minions. I mean, maybe the problem is that we are picking too many weapons as warrior, and just weapons aren't that good, and we just can't get over the fact since ever since we've been playing, weapons have been so good for warrior. Maybe we have to be like, hey, maybe warrior's a more minion oriented class now.
I don't think
definitely think
the
we
problem
haven't
is
tried
too
out all
many
strategies.
weapons. I don't think you get enough weapons even if you take all of them. Like
Yeah,
right
maybe.
now. But
what
we
I'm
do have to do
suggesting is
something
that
else
we're not playing it
too.
right.
Yeah. Like, we do
Yeah.
have to do something on top of the weapons. This is with the other cards. Like, what are we doing with the other cards? Which usually, right now, is like, try to get the board early on. But then we get punished. Because everyone has a way to deal with you getting the board early on now. So, maybe the idea is to not get the board early on, use weapons like a normal removal, and focus on this taunt thing that Blizzard seems to have a hard-on for. Like, just go with what Blizzard's doing, right? Like, Blizzard's giving you a lot of taunt stuff and ways to buff up your taunts. I don't know, maybe overvalue the taunts a little bit more.
I do like Ratsmah's attitude about like experimenting and sort of just like, let's just forget everything that we think we know, right?
Yeah.
And it could be absolutely wrong, and maybe there's a high chance it's even wrong, but let's do it. Let's try it out. And let's see. Like, because if you get stuck in the old ways too much, it prevents, it prevents a lot of cards from moving to potentially their true value. Like, Advocate, we've been ranking cards for a long time, and like, how long was Argent Squire being undervalued? Right?
Oh yeah, that was like more than a year.
You're right, more than a year, and now we recognize Argent Squire is like a pretty freaking good card. And stuff like Naturalize, that's something that's in discussion right now.
Oh god,
right?
Naturalize.
And
It's good right now.
It's
yeah,
really
the more
good
we
right
think
now.
about it, the
It's
more we're
really
like, why
good
isn't
right
it?
now.
Yeah, like, why isn't it crazy good?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is bad about the?
Nothing. It's crazy good.
Right. It's like,
I'm
if
trying to
Sap
talk
is-
Merps into making it a premium card.
I mean, if Sap is a premium card, then Naturalize should be at least a pretty good card. We still need to discuss this, but these are things that we are currently thinking about.
I think it's like with Sap, you can expect it from rogues. Like Naturalize as a standalone card, if you didn't know how popular the card was or what the public image of the card was, you'd be like, oh, this card's not bad in today's meta.
Yeah.
But because people have such a bad impression of Naturalize, you can catch people off guard, and you could really take advantage of this. Them playing one bog into and thinking it's safe just because it's Druid, right?
Oh yeah.
And you could really catch people off guard. So you do get that extra value.
And since we did the whole rearranging of our tier list over the summer, Naturalize has been an above average card on our tier list for 2 metas now. And I'm still trying to move it up.
I gotta say, whenever I think about Naturalize and the very few times I've had it played against me by my opponent, a lot of the times it's been so crushing. Yeah. Because it hit me from nowhere.
I think I've lost the past 5 times I've been Naturalized. Yeah. It's been that good. Yeah.
Card good, bad, Naturalize. Maybe premium.
And I question mark. I already see people in the chat right now be like, no, Naturalize is just bad. It's it gets such a visceral reaction. Yeah. It's no, there is no way Naturalize.
Everything I know about the arena goes out the window if Naturalize is a near premium card.
Right. It's almost as if me going up to you is hey, they actually just found out that none of us actually exist. This has been proven. And then you're going to get the people no, I exist. There's no way. I have to exist. This is the same thing. But the more I think about it, the less crazy it seems that Naturalize is just a good card, especially for the meta and yada yada. But when you break it down,
we are oversimplifying things. We are way oversimplifying things to just label certain cards, especially things like Naturalize, which does work with some decks and doesn't work with other decks. Right. You cannot just say something is good or bad. It all depends on the fit. And I definitely think that Naturalize has a good number of fits in a lot of decks.
Because Naturalize is a good fit, I think, if you ever want to end the game before top decking. Before your opponent is top decking ish. And these days, your opponent's deck can be pretty decently big, so that he may not be top decking for a while, and so you're just giving him 2 extra options rather than 2 extra cards that he'll actually play and turn into something when the game matters these days.
Not only that, even against aggressive decks, if you have a really greedy deck with Ironbarks and a bunch of big late game taunts, you can still use that to get you out of a really bad situation, and let your late game.
Yeah, you reset the tempo.
Yeah.
You cause that tempo swing. It's not quite a mass removal, but it kind of a little reactively does the same thing. Or you put out a giant taunt and then you Naturalize their big thing. Boom, now you're on the board. I don't know. These are the things you got to do, right? Druid's not a good class right now, so if you're playing Druid, you got to start doing something.
Where did the beast energy go in Druid? I felt like it was so prevalent before. I feel like it's so hard to draft a beast Druid now.
Yeah. Well, you used to have an offering bonus to mark, right? Yeah. And now you don't. And now it's so miserable.
Well, now they're as synergistic as Hunters, instead of being more synergistic than Hunters, which annoyed me.
Yeah.
I liked it, man.
But their package... Right, but it's their aggressive package isn't as good as the Hunter. And then they have a ping, but they'll never out-control the control decks because their ping is terrible in the late game, right? How many times have you had to kill a 6-1 with your face, and then you do it again with a 5-1, and sure, it's fine, but now you're at 8 health and you can't do it again, right? It's really tough to play the super late game with Druid, but at the same time,
it's really hard to play the super late game. I think you almost have to be a fast Druid. You have Lotus as well. You have the Mark of the Lotus, right? That's your one halfway decent card that you get. It's actually a good card that you get in this expansion with a bonus. You kind of pushed in that direction. You don't even have big cards anymore. They haven't released big cards for the Druid in the common slot since Classic.
Yeah.
Right.
It definitely feels like you're playing at a disadvantage when you're up against a real control class like Priest, Rogue, or Rogue too, Warlock, Mage. You're the only one that doesn't have decent hard removal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's just I think Druid's the next class that's going to get some love because Druid is so fundamental that Blizzard's like average win rates has Druid at like the very bottom now probably. So, so I think this was the Priest expansion, right? This was like the Priest and Warlock expansion. Warlock maybe as a not as a goal, but they just happened to give him good cards. But Priest, they definitely wanted to buff the Priest. Next one's going to be Druid, so. I'm expecting some good things to happen there, but I hope they don't leave the Warrior behind again. It's I don't know. Do you think Warrior's the worst class right now, or just like in that same pool with like Druid or maybe Hunter or whatever, Shaman? I don't know.
Honestly, like with this talk, I've gotten some inspiration to like try to draft more of a minion heavy warrior deck, or maybe a deck that has all utility and you get like whirlwinds, like pick whirlwinds at a premium. Like I don't ever like giving, especially since it's so early. In the meta, I don't like saying certain classes are like unplayable or weak. Like I am firmly a believer that there is a successful way to play every single class, and sure, there's going to be certain classes that are just stronger, but it doesn't mean that you can't be successful and even go infinite with every single class.
Mm-hmm.
So I like it.
Yeah.
Let us know after you lose all of your gold. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to borrow some for you guys. I mean, that's something worth using my gold on. Like what's the point of having it on your account? Like that's why we play weaker classes, right? We don't just stick with the strong ones.
Wait, there's no intrinsic value in having the number be higher?
Really.
that is my existentialist crisis if that's true. Like what Mervs was saying about going up to someone and saying we don't exist. If someone tells me that random virtual numbers do not have any meaning.
I mean, it depends on your person. Right? It's either you like to like save money in your bank account, or you like to spend it. And, you value yourself based on how you spend it and the experiences you have. That's kind of where I kind of pull myself. Is I'm willing to draft try to get a Jade deck and retire until I do, and try to have that experience for that gold. And that's why I try to build up my gold bank. Yeah.
I think I had a 6 Jade rogue before, and I think we got like 1/2/2 Jade Golem in a way that mattered. Like the 3/3 Jade Golems, whenever they came out, we had already won or lost. So 6 is not like good enough for the mechanic to like overpower you to victory. It's fine, right? It does its job, but
I mean, it depends, right? Like the Shaman, like Jade Claws are so good. Same with like the Jade Shurikens and Rogue. But like the other one, like what's the 7-drop Jade card for Shaman?
Jade Chieftain.
Yeah.
It's bad. It's bad.
I had 5 of those in a deck. It was awesome, dude. Yeah, I had 5 of those.
7-drops in a deck.
You had 5 7. Oh my
like
God.
I said, I try to do these crazy things. And sometimes it's like, okay, now there's a 5th one. I have like.
It's not the same thing as having like 5 Jade Lightnings or 5 Jade Shurikens.
Wait, guys. You heard it here first. You've survived an hour and 25 minutes, and now you get the real news. 5 Jade Chieftains does not work in an arena deck.
Do not try this at home.
You should have seen my curve. I had 0 6-drops. I had like 2 Bog Creepers and a Captain Yormonger, and then 5
Oh my God, you
more
had other 7 mana cards?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait, what? How did you?
Chieftains were offered. I already had those cards because they're pretty decent cards.
How did you do?
It actually didn't do that bad. I went 5 or 6, I believe. So
Okay,
like, I got
that's
rushed
better
down a lot.
That's how the meta is right now. People
Yeah.
are slow enough that they don't kill you before you can get all of your 7 mana cards out. And I mean all of your 7 mana cards, all like 6, 7 of them.
Oh yeah, and they don't expect the 5th Jade Chieftain. They can get 6, 6, 7, 7 times.
I think you're being kind. I don't think they expect the 3rd or the 4th.
Or the 2nd one.
They definitely don't expect the 5th one after they already did not expect the previous 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, good job, man. Good job.
All right. Anything else you want to talk about, Ratsmah? One last topic, free topic, before we wrap this up. MSG related, arena related.
I always ask you guys this one. Like, what is your favorite meta been, and how does this one fit in that tier? Like, what is your favorite meta? What is the worst meta, and how's this one?
GVG worst meta. Just because it was so like turn 4, turn 3 game winning. And best meta, probably... See, I don't mind Keeper of Oldemon as much as Merps absolutely hates Keeper of Oldemon. So I think the LOE meta was the best meta.
You gotta be kidding me.
It was controlled enough there was a lot of Discover going on, and I like Discover. And it was controlled enough without too many cards. There's too many cards now. There's definitely too many cards now, and there's going to be even more cards going forward. So it didn't get to that issue yet, and it was like a normal-ish meta. In the same way that the last of the Karazhan meta was a normal-ish meta, like after they took away the off-rate bonus. But it was before we had the Karazhan cards and the OG cards, and now the MSG cards, which kind of muddles things a bit. I think this meta's fine too. I like it, like I like playing it, but it's definitely like I still think it's more rock paper scissory than I would like it to be, and it kind of is necessitated by the fact that they have three gangs each kind of trying to do their own thing. That some are going to be better than the other ones, but there are definitely times where I would draft a deck and I'm like, well, it depends on who I face. I've got Warlocks. I'm going to do okay against Mages. I'm going to lose against Paladins. And then I proceed to lose 3 games against Paladins. Like, that's happened to me way more frequently than it used to.
Yeah, okay. I'll say that this meta has a chance to be the best. And it's not just because of, like, the way everything plays out. And it is true that there's a little bit too many cards nowadays. So it's tough to play around anything specific. But I love the fact that this expansion seems like they spent a ton of time and effort on it, right? Like that, I think is so appreciated. The fact that they're putting in this amount of work, they're introducing so much new stuff because they didn't have to do all of that, right? Like they didn't have to introduce sort of, the 3 gangs, because you do something like the 3 gangs and you're almost doing like double or triple the amount of work that you normally would have to do. So from that aspect, I really appreciate it. And then because they did that, it opens up new ways to play with and to play against these classes. It opens up class diversity a little bit. So even though it might not be my favorite time to play, I think it is sort of like the absolute best we could get for, end of 2016. So that's what I really appreciate about it.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. I mean, before I would say like Classic was best, but now playing this meta, it kind of feels like Classic was very like basic. You gotta make your value trades.
I think
Sometimes
you're on
you
the
make
member
a
berries. Classic had its issues, man. You miss a
yeah, it did.
drop,
Oh
you
yeah,
lose.
it did. Oh yeah, it did. But like now, this is like we're getting into advanced stuff. Like there's so much in my mind, at least. There's like so much more like randomness, but at the same time, there's a lot more skill too, and there's like nuance. There's a lot of nuance to how you play out your games and draft your decks, and I that alone makes the game so much more interesting. And I think Arena is in a great position right now. And I would say that this is my favorite meta, like right now.
Right now? I think it's definitely up there as one of the best, definitely. And it is extremely interesting. Like, it's been, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks now? I haven't figured out the meta. Like, I can't, like, usually in OG, for example, like, a week into the OG meta, I'm like, I got this. Like, I'm going to play the same exact way from now until Karazhan. Like, I figured it out. I'm performing optimally. I'm good. I'm not there yet.
See, that's boring.
Right, exactly. That's why OG was not terribly great as far as arena meta goes. Even though it was very fundamental on the board, kind of like, back to the basics kind of deal. But this one, there's still so much for me to, like, figure out and learn about, like, hand buffs and about, like, Warlock. Warlock, the thing.
Dude. MSG is like MSG is a mysterious bitch. I mean, that just makes her more attractive. It's just like, oh, I gotta figure this girl out. Like you're playing hard to get, and the chase is what it's about. And this chase has been long, and it's still ongoing. And the way, because of all the different dynamics in this game now, I don't think it's something you'll ever figure out. And I think that's probably one of the most exciting things: the fact that something new could pop up at any time. Yeah.
Well, now we also know what kind of girl Ratsmah likes as well. So
there you go.
Thank you for that information. But anyways, Ratsmah, thank you for everything. If we want to find more content from you, where can we find it?
I'm mostly on just Twitch, twitch.tv/Ratsmah. You can find me on there. I do sometimes upload to the YouTube channel, but I wouldn't expect you guys you guys shouldn't expect content on there. Just follow me on Twitch.
You can check out what already exists. Which is a lot of like good like guides on and good like in-depth discussions on like certain topics in the arena.
Yeah.
Also, he's on Twitter.
Yeah, find me on Twitter.
Ratsmah's Twitter is extremely interesting.
You can also, I'll also like update, like I always post when I'm like tweet out when I'm going to be streaming, so you can catch them. They're always in the morning. So.
All right, Ratsmah, thank you for that incredible self-promotion. You're almost as good at the arena as you are self-promotion. All right?
Oh man, that's a pretty big insult then, huh?
I mean, I didn't say anything. It's just, you know, we're comparing two things that are over here. But anyways, thanks a lot, man. And make sure to catch Ratsmah's stream.
He was so bad at self-promotion, we started off knowing his name, and now we don't even know his name.
We confused ourselves.
All right, until next time, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. See you guys.
Ratsmah?
You're important too. Goodbye.
Sorry, my fault. Oh, God.
All right.